So here we are at the end of 2020, and I have a graphics card that I've had for a while now that I've been wanting to take another look at here in 2020, but I was holding off until Cyberpunk 2077 came out, and that's just because that's a game I know a lot of you will want benchmarked moving forward, and that card is a very niche one, and that's the R9 Nano from AMD back in 2015. Let's take a look at how this thing is holding up here at the end of 2020, moving towards 2021. So the R9 Nano, very niche product here, and there's a lot of reasons for that. First and foremost, it is an extremely small card. It's exactly 2 slots wide. It doesn't have any sort of overhang. It's not like 2.5 slots or anything like that. And it's gonna fit in virtually all ITX rigs because the actual size of it, this thing is barely longer than the PCIe slot that it fits into. So no matter how small your ITX system is, if it accepts a dual width graphics card, this thing is almost certainly going to fit. Now you'd be forgiven by looking at this card assuming that it wasn't a very high-end part, because a lot of these single fan cards are reserved for the lower tier graphics cards, or at least the mid-tier graphics cards, but this was a premium product. When it launched, it was $649 MSRP, and that was back again in August of 2015. So this thing was supposed to be hitting with some of the bigger dogs out there in the graphics card fight. So basically this thing is a Fury X just shaved down quite a bit to make it, not eat through a power budget and not make it absolutely obliterate any sort of small form factor power supplies out there, but it did feature 4 gigabytes of HBM memory, which is how it was able to keep the entire card so small. You didn't have to reserve all that PCB space for memory chips because it was all right there with the actual GPU die, and it's all cooled by this single fan cooler, which, by the way, this thing is metal. This is actually a well-built card, at least physically it feels really solid. Now usually when I take a look back at these graphics cards from years gone by, it's with the mindset of should you buy these things on the used market, with the eye being towards building a budget gaming PC, and with the R9 Nano, the answer is no. If you go to places like eBay, you're not gonna find very many of them available. The ones that are available tend to be a little bit more expensive than a card that performs similarly, but is just significantly cheaper, and that may be because availability from the get-go for those cards was generally higher, because there wasn't a ton of these kicking around to begin with, and they were an obscenely high price for what they are, at least to begin with, and then AMD quite quickly cut the price down to like 500 USD, but that's still quite expensive. So regardless, when you look on eBay, you're probably not gonna find these things at really solid deals. So really the only reason you should be looking at these is to either play with it because you like to play with old graphics cards, or because you have a very small form factor ITX build that you're putting together and you really need a card that's this small. Now before we hop into the benchmarks themselves, we should mention the test bench is featuring a Ryzen 5 5600X with 32 gigabytes running in dual channel of DDR4 memory, and that's at 3200 megahertz. Then of course the games are run off of a SATA SSD, and then obviously the GPU that we're testing here, the R9 Nano. So now we can hop into those benchmarks. So jumping right into it with Fortnite, probably the most popular battle royale game out there right now, we're seeing an average FPS on the low preset 1080p of 250, 1% low there at 161, and a 0.1% low just above 60 there at 70 FPS. But the nice thing here is that we are keeping those 1% and 0.1% lows above 60. So if you're playing on a 60 Hz monitor, for instance, you're gonna have an absolute fantastic experience with this card. And even if you're playing on a higher refresh rate monitor, you're still gonna have a really solid experience. Keep in mind that 0.1% low number, a lot of that is coming from when you first drop into a game. You almost always with Fortnite experience just a little bit of stutter. Even with higher end systems, you tend to get just a little bit of stutter. So looking more at that 1% low number is, at least in my mind, a bigger deal with this title. And 161 is a very good 1% low for this card. So this is gonna give you a great experience with Fortnite. Now, Call of Duty Warzone was a similar experience where we had a good average FPS here at 108 on the low settings, and then 1% low at 83, 0.1% low at 66. Basically, this was a really smooth experience, and we're seeing less variation from the average frame rate down to the 0.1% lows in this title. So you're getting a very nice, consistent, smooth experience with Warzone. Again, a big thumbs up for this title. And then we start moving into some single player games that are a little bit more demanding on the system, starting with Borderlands 3 on medium settings, or at least the medium preset at 1080p. And we saw an average FPS of 72, so we are hitting that 60 FPS mark with medium settings, and the 1% low was just barely below 60 FPS. So you will see a dip occasionally below 60 FPS, but it's not going to be a huge dip way down towards 30 or anything like that. You're gonna get a smooth experience. And the nice thing that I've seen with Borderlands 3 repeatedly in my testing is that it is pretty consistent with its frame times from the average clear down to the 0.1% low, which, speaking of, is 50 FPS. So again, a nice smooth experience. You're really not gonna see much stutter in this game. Moving on to the Red Dead Redemption 2 benchmark, we see with medium settings across the board an average FPS of 52, a 1% low of 42, and a 0.1% low of 41. So even though we're not quite hitting 60 FPS, again, this is a very consistent frame-timed game. So you shouldn't be seeing stutter even though you're less than 60 FPS. For a game with the pacing of Red Dead Redemption 2, that's probably fine. And if you really do want to hit that 60 FPS number, you do have some settings you can drop down to low to get yourself to that mark. And finally, the game that has been crushing the last generation consoles since it launched, that is Cyberpunk 2077 on medium settings. That's the medium preset at least, and that includes the texture set to medium as well. I saw an average FPS of 42, a 1% low, still of above 30 at 31, and a 0.1% low of 27. So basically, in other words, you are seeing very occasional dips below 30 FPS, but it was not distracting from the game. I was driving around the city as well as hopping out of my car and running around a little bit, getting into fights, that sort of thing, and I really didn't notice much stutter of any kind with this card. Now keep in mind, I am running a strong CPU on the test bench as well. The Ryzen 5600X is a very solid gaming CPU, so this is just looking at the graphics card. The graphics card itself though, this R9 Nano can absolutely run Cyberpunk 2077 on the medium preset, and if you need some more frames, you do have, again, those settings to drop down a little bit in case you want to get higher FPS across the board. So gaming performance with the R9 Nano here in 2020 is actually quite solid for a card that is now 5 years old. Again, this is just a very small market that actually purchased this card because it was so expensive at launch, and even now is probably more expensive than it should be, but the last nail in the coffin of the R9 Nano, and it's really another big reason not to get this card, is the coil whine on this thing is absolutely terrible. And I would chalk this up to just maybe the one that I got has really bad coil whine, but this has been something that we actually heard way back when the Fury cards launched, was coil whine issues. And I'll give you a little bit of a taste of just what the coil whine sounds like. And this is in-game. This is not in menus where the FPS is crazy high. This is actually like sitting in a game, just like sitting there, and yeah, I'll let you listen to the coil whine. So, conclusion here, don't buy an R9 Nano unless it's really the only option out there, but for those of you that do happen to already have one, there's actually a pretty good chance you're still happy with it. But I do want to hear from you guys, especially those of you out there that may have one of these cards. Let me know what your feelings now that it's 5 years old. What are your feelings on the R9 Nano? Let us know in those comments down below. And of course, if you like this video, give this video a like, share, subscribe, comment. All those things are very helpful for the channel. You can follow me both on Instagram and on Twitter at Hoosier Hardware. And as always, I'll let YouTube queue up a couple more videos from my channel for you to watch. I'm Shane with Hoosier Hardware, and I'll see you guys in the next video.